Hello and welcome back to the Music Behind the Magic podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Goodman, and as always, it is my goal to celebrate with you the magic of Disney songs, scores, and soundtracks from the movies to the parks. I hope everyone was able to enjoy a great 4th of July holiday weekend. This past weekend, you'll eat some good food, maybe some barbecue, listen to some good old-fashioned patriotic songs and music, and also everyone still has all of your fingers and toes with no unforeseen fireworks incidents. Well, this week, I am very excited to be joined by Len Testa, who many of you might know is one of the foremost experts on Disney planning, Disney history, and who has uncovered some amazing musical discoveries that he did on a recent research excursion at the Buddy Baker Archives in New York City. We will learn about Len and his background, what he found, and then I have to apologize in advance. He and I go off on a bit of a tangent involving rock guitar playing and our favorite rock guitarists. It's my fault. I did it. I let him down the rabbit hole. I think I recover pretty well and bring it back to where we're supposed to be. But please blame me. Even though it's still a fun conversation, I apologize in advance for that. Len was generous enough to share his time as well as recordings of what he found. And just from an administrative note, there isn't a great way for me to cut into our interview to play the music that he provided during our discussion. So I'm going to break the interview into two parts. First, I'll play our conversation that we had when he talks about the music that he discovered, talks about some of the lyrics, how it all applies to what Disney was planning to do with the music that he found. And then I will then recap it in a second segment. I will play the music that he actually provided to us. I also want to stress that Len did all of this on his own dime. He found this undiscovered music. He then hired musicians to record it. He produced it. He paid money for the recording studio, and he did it all so we can hear it and it's out in the public and we can really hear and appreciate this unknown part of Disney history. And for that, we are very, very grateful. So with that, please sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Len Testa. We are thrilled to be joined by Len Testa today. Let me take a quick second to introduce Len. If you have ever planned a trip to Disney, you should be familiar with Len. Len is the co-author of the Unofficial Guide to Disney World, the Unofficial Guide to Disneyland, and the Unofficial Guide to Disney Cruise Line. In grad school, Len's master thesis described new computer techniques for generating efficient theme park touring plans, for which Len was awarded a U.S. patent, which is fantastic. These days, Len leads the team at touringplans.com, which everyone should check out if you have not, which is a research arm of the Unofficial Guides. You can also find him as co-host of the Disney Dish podcast, along with Jim Hill. And as we will discuss today, you can add musical philanthropist and arts to his resume. And I'm dead serious. I am dead serious. Len has stayed in every Disney hotel, experienced every Disney ride, eaten at every Disney restaurant and food cart in the U.S., which we'll discuss later as well. Len, it is so good to see you again. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
That's good, Jonathan.
So mentioned a little bit at the beginning, just such an interesting background. Would love to just rewind and learn a little bit about let's hear about your Disney journey, right? So how'd you fall in love with Disney? How'd you get to be, where you are? But more importantly, how did the inspiration arise to take your academic discipline, marry it with Disney and make a career out of it?
So the first Disney experience I ever remember was going to the Magic Kingdom of Florida with my grandparents back when they moved to Florida, and the attraction that made me fall in love with Disney World was Pirates of the Caribbean. So I remember as a kid walking through the queue and noticing that Disney had built lights that flickered as if they were candles, and I realized pretty quickly that someone had to not only think of that as an effect, right? Like, let's just not have regular lights, let's have lights that look like candles, but then they had to build it, right? And then they had to care enough to put it in and spend the money and stuff like that. And I was super impressed with it. So that made me fall in love with Disney theme parks. And then later on, when I was living in Florida, my family would go, once every couple of years or so. And then when during college, my sister and I would meet in Orlando and, to go to Disney World. I have a twin sister. So we would go to Disney World every year for our birthday.
Awesome.
And the year that I started graduate school in late August, and so in early August, we went to Disney World. I remember waiting in the line for 2 hours for this ride called Great Movie Ride.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And in the sun, and I was like, oh my God, there's got to be a better way to see Disney World than this. So my idea was for a computer program where you tell the computer program the ride you want to ride in Disney World. and it tells you the order in which you should ride the rides to minimize your wait in line. And it turns out that it's a super complicated scheduling problem. It's this thing called the traveling salesman problem,
Yep.
kind of famous in math and computer science. So my master's thesis looked at that, and technically for theme parks, it's this thing called a time-dependent traveling salesman problem, which is actually harder than the regular traveling salesman problem because time is involved. Yeah, so I in grad school I got a patent. Then because I was looking for data and for other people who did similar things, I got in touch with Bob Salinger, who was writing the Unofficial Guide. And then since I was spending so much time in the parks selecting wait times, I would send him updates in the book, like, this name has changed, this menu item is no longer available. And eventually, the individual sentences that I was correcting became paragraphs, paragraphs became pages, pages became chapters. Eventually I started co-authoring the book. I think 2003 was the first year that I co-authored the book. Yeah, and I did 20 years, and this is the first year that I didn't co-author it. So in 20 years. So
How's that feel? Is it weight off your shoulders? Do you miss it?
it was interesting. I did 20 years, and the thing that I looked at was the target demographic for the book, and I'm not anymore, right? Because my one child was fully grown. So, really what the book needs is someone who's still, super technical, who understands data and can crunch a lot of it, but also has the perspective of being a parent with small children. So that's where we got one of our data scientists, Becky Gandelin, to co-author of this year's book. So yeah, super excited for that. Also, she cut 250 pages from the book, which is a minor miracle in and of itself.
That book is healthy.
Yeah, it was 750 pages, I think, the last year that I did it. But then, because Universal's opening Epic Universe next year, the question was do we make it 900 pages with Epic, or do we just take all the Universal stuff out and put it in the Universal book? And that's what we ended up doing, because it was, we already getting complaints about it being too big and stuff like that. So yeah.
No, that's great. And Touring Plan, still an ongoing thing?
Yeah, so I started this website called touringplans.com, which is basically the implementation of my thesis. It started off as that, where you could create custom touring plans for the Disney parks. So one of the things that we realized with the book pretty early on was that for any printed touring plan, there are a couple of major issues that are really difficult to overcome. One is you can't customize it, right? Because it's in print. And then number two, no matter how general you make it, there's probably not more than 25% of your audience that a specific touring plan in a print form would ever be able to work for. So the need for custom plans is really interesting. So once Amazon came out with its cloud computing service, and then once the iPhone came out, those are sort of the two big technological innovations that we needed to basically create a mobile app that you could follow along during the day. So that's what it is. Yeah. So I think we've done.
Go ahead. Please go on.
34. I think we've done 34 million touring plans for people. Yeah, an astounding number. Yeah.
And not only that, and I think the way Disney did it changed, but I used it also not just for the touring plans, which were amazing, but for restaurant reservations, because it was super hard. That was actually, that was the best value add thing of all, getting the restaurant reservations, that. So that was also tremendous and an incredible frustration saver.
Yeah, the site's expanded over the years to try to address all of the common pain points that people feel for a Disney vacation. So we have this thing called the least expensive ticket calculator. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay, so so it started out as this. Bob Salinger, when I was writing the book, he said, Disney's got literally thousands of different ticket combinations you could buy, right? And so Bob asked me to come up with 3 or 4 rules that people could follow to get the absolute best deal on their tickets. And so I spent a month trying to synthesize all of this down into the 3 or 4 rules. And it turns out it's impossible.
Yeah.
You pretty much have to write a computer program to do it. But it's the interesting thing about the computer program is that it's an implementation of this thing called the knapsack problem. It's a classic problem in optimization. If you've ever seen the TV show Supermarket Sweeps, it's the exact same problem that you're trying to solve in Supermarket Sweeps. So there's an analogy there. The other interesting thing that we did was this. So 2011 was the last year in which I answered all of my own email for the book, and that year, I think I answered like 14,000 emails, which is basically a full-time job.
Of course.
And so Bob and I were sitting around trying to think of ways that we could automate or build tools that could answer these questions for people so I didn't have to do it. And one of the most common questions we were getting was this: I'm going to Disney World, I'm staying at a Disney hotel. What hotel room number should I ask for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because Disney has like 30,000 different hotel rooms, right? And each one of them has a different view, and they've got different, walking distances to the lobby or to transportation. So we called over our photographer. We were staying at Pop Century. Bob and I were drinking at the Pedals Bar, and we asked our photographer, like, go to this one building. There's 192 rooms in this building, and do me a favor and take the photo that you would see if you were looking at the window to that room. Like, what's the view that you get from that room? So he came back in an hour with 192 photos. So we did the math, and we're like, well, if it took him an hour to do 192 rooms, it would take him around a month to do all 30,000 hotel rooms in Walt Disney World. So we're like, okay, go do that. And then we ended up building maps, floor by floor, room by room, building by building, of every hotel in Walt Disney World. So 30,000 rooms, all indestructible hotels. So think about that. So like, a resort like, Riverside, which has a couple thousand rooms or whatever, we had to draw individual rectangles on a map for a couple thousand of those hotel rooms. But we put it online. So it's this thing called the room finder. And you can tell me the type of room that you're booking. So like, I'm staying at Grand Floridian. I booked a water view, 2 queen, 1 day bedroom. And it'll show you on a map all of the buildings that contain those rooms. And then if you click on a building, it'll show you all of the floors that have those kinds of rooms. And if you click on an individual room on that floor, it'll show you the exact view you get from that very specific room in Walt Disney World. And that took us a year to build.
The fact there's only a year is remarkable, but super helpful. Like I do it all the time. It's like, well, if we stay at Saratoga Springs, that's one of our home resorts, which is a huge resort. I'm like, all right, I'm not staying at this one because it's not on the list of ones to ask for.
Yeah, the cool thing about this is that we there were certain the values of the moderates are easy to get because they're mostly exterior doors. But for the deluxes, Disney helped us out as much as they could. But there were just some rooms that we couldn't get into, right? They were occupied, or they were being refurbished or whatever. So we asked our users, touringplans.com users, to send in the photos as they got them, and I think we've got like 97% coverage right now. Like there are relatively few rooms that we actually don't have the specific view that you get from that exact room.
Crowdsourcing. So you were way ahead of the game on crowdsourcing, automation. You were like AI before AI happened.
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing. We were into optimization algorithms 25 years ago, and this idea of like big data or whatever. We were playing around with that literally as soon as the tools became available. So there are a lot of innovations that we've done both in the travel industry and for Disney specifically, just around our coverage. Yeah,
it's terrific. So that leads to kind of an interesting twist, right? So we met about 2 weeks ago at the Theme Park Music and Sound Conference, and you were a presenter, and you wrote about it, and you spoke about a discovery you found when you were researching Buddy Baker and the Buddy Baker archives in New York. So I guess, if you don't mind, for those unfamiliar, talk about Buddy Baker, who he is and why he was so important, and then talk about what you've done, how you did it, and the discovery you made. Would love to, because one thing I didn't really hear was how this happened, how you came to this whole realization.
So one of the things that I'm really interested in is understanding, broadly how the Disney theme parks work. And not only from an operational perspective, like how long are you going to wait in line, or, what's the best way to save money and stuff like that. But also like, how did they get built? What were the Imagineers going for? And sort of what's the story of what happened along the way? And so my co-host on the Disney Dish podcast, Jim Hill, and I would go through and we would describe, Jim's a great historian, and he would be able to tell you, like, here's how this ride got built, right? It's like Buzz Lightyear in the Magic Kingdom originally started off as If You Had Wings, right? So the iteration of all those different things. And then we started doing a series on things that never got built. And for that, I was looking at things like the Buzz Price archives at the University of Central Florida, as well as other things. So there's a number of attractions. There's a number of things that didn't get built, right? Westcott in California never got built and stuff like that. And so in the course of doing that research, I was looking at university archives. So the Disney archives are obviously the simple repository for all this information. But you and I, Jonathan, are not getting into the archives, right?
Notoriously difficult. Notoriously difficult. Yeah.
Never going to let us, right? So the question then is, what other archives contain Disney material that are publicly available? And there's a few of them. The Buzz Price archives I mentioned at UCF are invaluable if you want to know like how the parks are run. But another archive I found was Buddy Baker. And so Buddy Baker was a composer. He was hired by Walt himself in 1955 on the recommendation of George Bruns, who was another Disney composer. And he worked basically from 1955 until he died in 2002. He basically worked for Disney. He started off working on TV, movies, and theme park stuff, and then sort of later on focused on the same things. So he did a ton of work on everything from ad jingles for Disneyland to soundtracks to entire Epcot pavilions. And so the archives, when Buddy Baker died in 2002, his wife donated all of his papers to New York University's Fales Library in 2004. So the Fales Library has about 100 boxes of his handwritten music for various Disney rides. And it's, categorized by box and by folder, right? So there might be a box labeled Epcot, and within that, there are folders labeled things like Energy Pavilion and, Frank's Pavilion and so on. So going through those was really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is the people who were doing the categorization in the archives weren't all that familiar with Disney theme parks. So sometimes you get papers that are kind of mixed up, that don't go together. And that's always surprising to find. But the other interesting thing was that there's a set of music in the archives that Buddy Baker recorded for attractions that never got built. And that was a really interesting thing to me for a couple of reasons. One is it shows you how far along the idea got. So it wasn't just sort of like, here's some concept art, maybe we'll build this one day. By the time you invoke an orchestra and get Buddy Baker to write the soundtrack for it, you're either at the point where it's like, okay, let's see how this idea would work in practice, or this thing is going to get built, right? Totally. It's very rare to bring in an orchestra on something that ultimately doesn't happen because they're expensive, right? So I found this set of attraction soundtracks that were apparently recorded but never released because the attractions never got built. And of course, Jonathan, the major question then is like, well, what does this even sound? So
you gotta know, right?
Yeah. So I hired a set of musicians and singers to perform the music, and there's some interpretation that had to happen along the way. And then so I recorded them. Then I asked Disney if I could license them. And the interesting thing with that is so here's the thing. Anytime you ask Disney a question, Disney, basically the flow chart that Disney goes through for that is this: can we make a lot of money by saying yes? If that answer is yes, they say yes. Otherwise, they say yeah. Right? Just there's no reason to say yes. But it's interesting to talk with Disney licensing, because they said we can't find anyone to say yes. So unfortunately, the answer is no. So it was just like, we don't even know who in this large organization would say yes, right? So that means I couldn't, release them. I couldn't record them and make, let's put this. But there's always a fair use exception, right? So as I looked at the music more, I realized that there were stories around it, right? Not only from how it got built to why choose this particular key for this set of music? Why would you pick a major key versus a minor key, stuff like that? And then the stories around the musicians themselves, in some cases, are super interesting. The other reason that I wanted to record them is this. there is academic analysis of Disney theme park rides. And in at least one case, there was an instance where an author looked at an attraction script, the words that were said during the script. In this case, it's Carousel of Progress. And because they were looking at the script, the words, rather than how the words were pronounced, their conclusion was the exact opposite of what it should have been. So they came to the wrong conclusion because they read the words rather than heard the words. Right. And the words are this in Carousel of Progress. Sarah says to John at one point, "Yes, John, you're a genius." Like when they're talking about the paint mixer scene.
Yep.
Okay. So if you read that, Sarah says to John, "Yes, John, you're a genius." And if you read just the text, Sarah thinks John is smart. But if you hear it, we all have heard it, Sarah's being sarcastic.
Totally.
When she says it. So the meaning is the exact opposite of what the words say on paper. So we thought it was important then to hear the music to make sure that the words and the music made sense in the context of the ride. So we had to record it. And then when you record it, I mean, it's one thing is like, for my opinion of the music, but it's always good to have like peers review it as well to tell you if that makes sense. And that's why I ended up at the music conference. So so that's it.
That's awesome. So how long, did it take for you to find the music, record it? What was the process like from discovery to producing to listening and analyzing yourself?
So there were four main areas that I was looking at. One was there was songs for the earliest versions of the American Adventure. There was also a folder labeled Energy, and this is around the time that Buddy Baker's working on Epcot. So I figured that was the Energy Pavilion. But that required a bunch of research because it didn't look anything like the Epcot Pavilion the Energy Pavilion that we got.
Yeah.
Another one was for this thing called Enchanted Snow Palace, which was Disney's first take on the story of Frozen. And then my favorite one was on the unbuilt Africa Pavilion for Epcot. So doing a little bit of research on that. It probably took a week in the archives, a couple of weeks of, doing the music, and then probably another week or so of, basic research, probably a month and all to do all the research. But the great thing about it, thing about it is that not only do the songs tell us a little bit about what they were going for with these attractions, but in many cases there are dates on which the music was recorded, and that helps us fill in the gaps on the timeline by which these attractions got developed. I can give some examples if you want.
Please, I would love to. Yeah, definitely. Because like I said, these are discoveries, never before seen. I remember at the conference, some were awesome, some didn't age so well. So would love to hear about that. Talk about the music and what you discovered.
Yeah, so starting with the American Adventure, we know there's a set of files, paper memorabilia in Buddy Baker's archives dated August 1st, 1981, in which the complete script for the American Adventure is present. It's literally word for word what we got in the opening day attraction. And Buddy's handwritten notes on that basically say, when this line is spoken, it starts at 68.2 seconds into the film. It ends 72.3 seconds into the film, and so on, because he's going to hit the music beats on those cues, right? So we know that definitely that the final score, the final music, and the final script were fixed no later than August 1st, 1981. And we know that the earliest known script is for this thing called USA Pavilion Show, dated April 8th, 1975. We know this because there's this fantastic website called DisneyDocs.net, run by my friend Tim Linhart. He's actually got the actual script itself, and it's dated April 8th, 1976. It was by Martis Flohr and John Pench.
Oh, wow.
But that actually says that it's the that is not the first revision. So we know that development began earlier than April of 1976. The question is now how much earlier. Okay, so Pete Docter from Pixar
Sure.
did this wonderful book about Mark Davis. It's called Mark Davis in His Own Words, 2 volume set, weighs like 50 pounds. Wonderful book. And Pete has some of the lyrics for this song called This Is America. And Pete notes that the date of those lyrics is January 14th, 1976, and it's the 4th draft of this script. Okay. The interesting thing is the Buddy Baker Archives also has a song called This Is America, dated January 14th, 1976, but it's got different lyrics than what's in Pete's book. So the question is how are they different, and why did it show up in Pete's book?
Yeah.
All right. So if you look in the archives, if you look in Pete's book, there are 4 published verses of this song called This Is America. And it talks about things like America's cities and transportation, American sports and recreation, American food, and American holidays, right? So I'll give you some of the lyrics, and they're all in Pete's book. It's small towns and big towns where skyscrapers soar, airlines and steamships and truckers by the score, railroads and steel mills and traffic on the road, highways and riverboats and cotton by the load. Okay. So sort of stuff on cities and transportation, kind of basic. But you get the meter, right? You get the line scheme and stuff like that. The interesting thing is that there is at least one unpublished verse from that that's in the Buddy Baker Archives, and I will give you that opening first now if you'd like to hear it.
Oh, of course.
And then we'll talk about why it doesn't show up in Pete Docter's book.
Fair enough.
So This Is America, the unpublished lyrics go like this. Doctor, lawyer, and an Indian chief, fireman, inventor. An inventor is spelled wrong in the lyrics. And freedom of belief, jazz bands at drugstores, and a candidate's speech, liberated Mrs. and bikinis at the beach. This is America. It's big and it's grand. This is America. This is our land.
Yeah.
So between the Indian chief, the liberated misses, and the bikinis at the beach, I kind of understand why this didn't get published and never saw the light of day.
I guess it's frowned upon these days. No, I mean, yeah, it's frowned upon these days.
I get it. Yeah, you get it. But this, number one, it's important to note the history, right? This is the first draft of the thing that would become the American invention. And it was interesting to see what, the lyrics are by Mark Davis, the music is by Buddy Baker. So it was interesting to see where Mark Davis was going with the lyrics. And again, this is first draft. We don't judge anyone on the first draft, but it's an interesting data point to see where we started and where we ended, right? It fills in sort of the gaps.
Totally. Yeah. And then you also mentioned, I remember you talked about the energy ride, and that sounded to me, and would love to hear your thoughts about it. It was pretty far ahead of that one, unlike the Mrs. This is pretty far ahead of its time in terms of being eco-conscious and, looking at that kind of eco-friendly type of lyrics.
Yeah. So we know that Exxon signed on as a sponsor for what would become the University of Energy Pavilion on January 28th, 1978, because Disney has said that's the date. And we know that the theme of like fossil fuel extraction was settled later that year in October of 78. But the Buddy Baker Archives has notes and music that suggest that prior to 1978, other themes and other concepts were being considered for the University of Energy Pavilion. Among them, there's some indication that Jiminy Cricket was supposed to be the host of the pavilion, and that energy conservation was supposed to be the theme. And the reason why I think that is in the Buddy Baker Archives, there's a set of documents titled Conservation, a Cricket Routine for the Energy Show. And it's dated April 5th, 1977, so prior to Exxon coming on board. It's in a folder, typed, Energy Pavilion Epcot, whatever. And the lyrics go like this. Conservation, that's for me, and paste it in your hat. That's conservation looks to be one answer where it's at. first to save on gasoline, a car that guzzles less,
Hmm.
next some insulation for that cozy little nest, right? So you can understand, Jonathan, why Exxon, which was in the business of selling fossil fuels, did not want conservation as a message, right? But the other question was why Jiminy Cricket?
Yeah.
And it turns out in doing some research, Jiminy Cricket was the star of a set of Disney educational films that were shown in schools from like 1955 to 1973.
Hmm.
And this series was titled I'm No Fool. And it explained to kids how to safely use things like bicycles or cars or electricity or
Hmm.
fire and stuff like that. So Jiminy Cricket was, at least in 1977, was viewed as here's someone that kids who, young adults would have grown up seeing in an educational context in the last 20 years. If Epcot is going to be semi-educational, they would be familiar both with the idea of Jiminy Cricket, because he's a well-known character by this point, but also with the idea of Jiminy telling you things about science.
Hmm.
So that's where that made sense. So there were two songs there. One of them is called I'm No Fool, parentheses, energy. And there are lyrics to that. And then there's a finale for that as well. But the interesting thing is they both say, Energy Pavilion on them, and they're both dated April of 1977. So the interesting thing there though is like the lyrics actually contain references to people who are like, energy conservation is not a problem. We have as much energy as we'll ever need and stuff like that. And like so Disney was kind of ahead of their time there.
That's so interesting. And then I think the other two you mentioned, well, you mentioned the Africa Pavilion, which never saw the light of day, and the Enchanted
Right.
Snow Palace as well.
Yeah.
Talk about those. This kind of when you walk through Epcot, you kind of have this strange quasi Africa type thing going on, but never was fully formed.
Yeah. So this was the interesting thing about this was if you go back and look at the Epcot book that Disney put out right around the time the park was opening, they have this great image at the beginning of the book, and it's sort of like a side view of the entire Epcot property. And they've labeled all of the pavilions that were in Epcot at that time. And the interesting thing is, of the pavilions that were labeled, we got every single one of them except for the Africa Pavilion.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. So it was going to happen, and they had worked on this for half a decade, easy. They started in like 1979 by visiting a bunch of countries in Africa. So the Ivory Coast, Liberia, Nigeria, Kenya, and Senegal, right? And they go back and revisit those. And the thing that they realize is two things. One, they really need sort of sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, you could do like Libya and Morocco, but that's not really what people think of when people think of Africa, right? They're on the African continent, but they're not really sub-Saharan. But then Disney, in this memo dated 1982, says, look, here's the issue. It's going to cost $40 million to build this pavilion. $40 million is basically 6% of the GDP of most of the sub-Saharan countries, except for South Africa. And we don't want South Africa.
Third rail, just a third rail.
Right. Yeah. Because, I mean, South Africa was an apartheid state
Of course.
at that time. There were many issues. So, like, basically what this memo says is like $40 million is a huge amount of money to every country but South Africa.
Yeah.
And we can't use South Africa, so it doesn't make sense. So they try to move forward with sort of like a instead of like one country sponsoring it, having multiple countries do it, but they kind of fell apart there. But the interesting thing there is they had actually engaged TV producer and author Alex Haley, who'd written Reads and done the miniseries,
Sure.
to talk about the Africa Pavilion. And so at this point, in 1982, they had an idea for an attraction. I think they pulled Buddy Baker in to record scratch tracks. Like, what would this sound like? What would the Africa Pavilion sound like if we were going to do it? And Buddy goes out for this recording session, and he does a couple of interesting things. One is he says, okay, we need actual African musical instruments for this. We're not going to try and do this on Western drums and, with guitars and stuff like that. We want actual African instruments. So he goes out and does research, and these are all in, Buddy Baker's archives. He's like, what are the instruments? How do you play them? What do they sound like? How big are they, and so on. And then he's got to find people to play them. And the interesting thing is this: he gets this family. It's the Led Zeppelin family. It's Kobla, Alfred, and Agby, and they are in the 70s. They are known for their skills as African drummers, but they're like session musicians in LA. They later go on to become basically a super group for a specific title called Iwe, which is Ghana drumming, and they become like basically the world's best, or the world's go-to people for this style of drumming. So in the 70s, they're in LA. They would go on later to be professors at UCLA and direct the Cal Arts African Music Center, right? But in the 70s, they're session musicians. So Buddy Baker grabs them one day. He also gets this guy named Leonice Shineman, who is a renowned drummer of Asian and African music. And he gets this guy named Emil Richards. And Emil is interesting because he's a very famous pop session musician in the 70s in LA. But he also has a collection of African musical instruments. So I think Buddy's like, look, if we bring Emil in, we can get the musicians, the musical instruments for free. You don't have to rent them, right? But the thing that I love about this is Emil goes on, so he does this session, but he's doing a ton of session work as well. He's eventually he ends up on Disney's Coco soundtrack. So he's the only person I know who was on the Coco soundtrack and also on Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On, which I think is just the funniest spectrum of music.
The complete opposite end of the spectrum. That's awesome. That's a great trivia piece.
So they record 3 tracks. And the third one is basically they're improvising in the recording studio, because 2 of the pieces of sheet music are formalized, right? They're written out and they're printed out so that everyone can copy. But the third one is literally handwritten notes, with basically each line being a different musician saying this is what you should play here. And you can see that he's scratching stuff out and adding stuff in as he's going along. So they're basically winging it in the studio, which is another for me, interesting way of seeing how the music gets done.
Well, I mean, I remember when you played at the conference, it was very sophisticated. It was, you felt it, right? And it was very methodical and very thoughtful the way they approached it. They were trying to get the right people. They were trying to really bring in that sense of authenticity. And that's very, very important.
Yeah. I mean, for this, they're getting Alex Hanley to do it, right? They're bringing in actual African musicians with the right instruments. I mean, it shows the level of authenticity that Disney was going for there, right? So. And then the last one was the Enchanted Snow.
Yeah, talk about that.
This was going to be a Disneyland attraction, I believe. It was Mark Davis had worked on it in the mid-70s. It was Disney's first take on the story that would become Frozen. The concept art that we have from this is from April of 1977. And then Buddy wrote 3 untitled ballets dated August of 77. The instruments that he has included in this are flute, Celeste part, which I guess this type of like harpsichord, harp, and percussion, and it's in B flat and minor, which is an interesting key choice. Because normally you would think like Theme Park Ride, it's going to be upbeat, unless it's haunted mansion or something like that, it's going to be in a minor key. This is B flat and minor, which is really interesting for me. It's got a what you'd think would be a happy ride in a minor key.
Sure.
Also, B flat is interesting because B flat is normally the key for brass instruments, I believe.
Yes, it is, and it's not a typical key in general. But like you said, certainly not for something that should be happy.
Right, and also if you're doing harp, percussion, and Celeste, I get there's a flute in there, but B minor is not the key that you would pick for that. Also, the other stuff that he'd written that we talked about was in A flat, major, which is sort of an which I kind of get, but yeah, it was an interesting key choice. So there are 3 ballets there. The interesting with the third ballet there is that it was unfinished. So he had written the third piece in 2 parts. One part had piano and then flute halfway through it, up to halfway, and then bells up to halfway. But then in the second half, it had a second flute that was different than the first. Also, the time signature varies throughout the piece. It's mostly 3/4, 3/4 time,
Mhm.
or 3/4, unless it's not. So there's this parts where like they do these fills and it's just like wing it. Anyway, so yeah. I haven't tried counting the music, counting the beats and everything on it, but that looks to be pretty challenging for that one.
And so I never asked you this, and I don't know if you mentioned at the conference. Are you a musician by training? Do you have a musical background? Do you just love music?
So during the pandemic, I started playing electric guitar for a couple of
Oh.
reasons. One, I needed something that did not involve sitting in front of a computer screen.
Yep.
And also, I'm a huge fan of the group Van Halen.
Who isn't?
Eddie, yeah, who isn't exactly? So Eddie Van Halen is my favorite rock musician. He died in 2020. So so like for me, it's interesting to see like how those songs are constructed. So I have a guitar tutor. I have lessons every week. In fact, literally before I did an hour and a half of practice just before you and I got on and trying to learn the song by a book called Triumph called Fight the Good Fight. So I'm learning a little bit about music. The fun thing was for one of these, I actually brought them to my guitar tutor. And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what are we doing here? So he's a jazz musician by training. So it was fun for him to see it. So yeah, it's fun to go through stuff.
So we didn't talk about this. I am also a rock guitarist. I've actually played guitar for like 35 years. And Eddie Van Halen is also one of my favorite guitarists. And so when the timing was weird, and I'm going off on a tangent here, but right when he passed, I was actually going to bite the bullet and buy one of the new Fender guitars, the EVH guitars, the Frankenstein. So I ordered it. Unfortunately, like the day after he passed, and of course, so did the rest of the world.
Gone.
So I eventually got it like 7 months later, and it is a magnificent instrument, and I kind of it's more than instrument. It's a work of art, right? So I actually I have it hung up on my wall, which makes it easy to play. But yes, Eddie's the greatest.
To show you this. So I have a Fender Squire that was my first guitar, and I loved it for a number of reasons. Right, it was easy, relatively easy to play. It's very lightweight, right? $200 guitar, but great for starting. But then I realized, like, as I started playing it, like, it wasn't very easy for me to do bar chords because the frets weren't high enough, right? So I eventually ended up with a Telecaster, which I love. So my daily driver is a Telecaster. But then I'm like, I've got this Fender, right? What am I going to do with it? So I was like, I'm going to take it apart and I'm going to do my own Frankenstein.
You're going all Eddie on it, yeah.
So this is you can see it, but let's see.
And there it is. There. Oh, you did. That actually looks really good. Did you do? So what'd you do? Did you use tape? Did you put tape on it?
So I did a bunch of things. One is so I'm also a huge fan of Randy Rhoads.
Of course. Oh boy. We have a whole set. We have a whole separate.
We're doing it. So Randy in 1981 did this live version of Crazy Train
with the polka dot flying V. Yeah.
With the V, and but the intro is different on the live version, right? So he's bending the G string at the 11th fret.
Yep.
And he's using the selector switch as basically like a fader.
Mm-hmm.
So he's holding it and he's going, and then he does the same thing on the G string on the 4th fret, but it does it even faster. It makes this like wah 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 sound. So I'm like, I'm gonna so this is a Fender, basically Strat replica, not a Gibson Les Paul. I'm gonna put a Gibson Les Paul selector switch on my Fender. So I did. And with a capacitor with a little bit of electronics, you can make it sound like that. Also, I took all of the pickups out and got a 1981 Seymour Duncan humbucker and put that in. And that's
probably screams. It screams, right? I bet you it screams.
I took out all of the electronics. Yeah, I also redid all the frets myself.
Oh my God.
Like jumbo tall frets. That was actually an experience. That turned out really well. And then locking nut tuners and stuff like that. So basically what I tell people is I have the world's most expensive $200 guitar.
That's awesome. And again, I can talk guitars with you all day,
Yeah, I
but
do this all day.
but bring it back to Disney music. I talked about this, a couple of weeks ago. Have you heard the album Disney Super Guitar? Okay, Disney Super Guitar is all shred electric guitar covers of Disney songs. Zach Wilde does a song. Paul Gilbert does a song. Orianthi does. Oh yeah, Orianthi does a song. So you can get it on iTunes. It is so far ahead of its time.
Covered Disney songs.
Yeah, they are instrumental versions, shred instrumental versions of Disney songs.
Beautiful. All right, so I'm gonna go look for this now.
It's just terrific. That's so. Speaking of which, since we're on the topic, like what are your go-to Disney songs? What are the songs that do it for you Disney wise?
So I think we talked about this at the conference, but when I was running my master's thesis, I played. So this was back in the late 1990s when the internet existed, but there weren't really high quality versions of theme park audio. You basically had to know people,
Yeah.
right? And then you'd break up like a 3 meg file into 10 300K files, just because your bandwidth wasn't that good. But I listened to the 1991 official album while I was running my master's thesis, and I listened to it until I burned out on it. Like I can't listen to it today because it brings back those memories of me sitting in an office just typing until 2 o'clock in the morning. Like I love all the music, don't get me wrong, I love the individual songs, but it was a time and a place, and it just, not all the numbers are great. It's like uh I think one of the best albums was 1993 was Sinead O'Connor's I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got,
Yeah.
which I listened to it till I can't listen to it anymore. Same thing. Like every song on that is beautiful. It is a masterpiece of an album. I just can't listen to it anymore.
I understand.
Right?
I get it.
Just
You got
can't
your
go
fill.
back. Can't go back. Yeah. So so I like background, theme park background music. I met Mike Knoll, who runs Mass Wolf Radio in the 2000s, and we did a podcast together for a number of years. But Mike's got the most complete collection of Disney theme park audio I think of anyone I know. So I've got maybe a couple hundred hours of theme park audio. So what I'll do typically is I'll throw some headphones on, put on the Epcot 1982 entrance loop for an hour, and do some more. And there's no words, so it's background noise.
Sure.
And I like to hear all of that stuff. Yeah, I think the Epcot stuff is super positive, very optimistic. I like the Magic Kingdom entrance loops as well. Animal Kingdom ends up with a lot of vocals.
Yeah.
And the drumming is a little it's hard to concentrate when you hear the drumming. And then with MGM it's a little bit different because you want to sing along with all the songs, so it's a little bit different there. But yeah, Magic Kingdom and Epcot I think had fantastic background music.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, look, I know it's getting late on the East Coast. I know it's coming up on a holiday weekend. First of all, what a blast of a conversation. I could talk to you all day. So what a blast of a conversation. How can people find you? What are you doing? How can people follow you? What's the best way to find out what Len Testa is doing and learning from you?
So on Instagram, I'm Len.Testa. And then my email is len@touringplanes.com.
That's awesome.
Also, you can find me on the Disney Dish podcast on iTunes. So, by the way, Jonathan, I've sent you an email with links to all of the audio files if you want to drop in samples.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much. That would be terrific. And listen, it was so great to chat with you, Len. Good to see you. Hope to see you again soon. We'd love to have you on again. And let's talk again some point soon.
Yeah, let me know when this is out. I'll definitely publicize it. I appreciate it.
I will do that. Thanks, Len. Have a great day. Happy 4th.
Thanks, you too, Jonathan. Thanks. Bye.
Okay. So I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Len. I know I enjoyed chatting with him, getting to know him more and hearing about these discoveries that he made, and hope you were all able to learn something new. And with that, wanted to take the opportunity to have you listen to some of those pieces that he had recorded with the musicians through the recording studio. The first one that he mentioned was the song This Is America, which is the draft for the America Pavilion. As we kind of jokingly mentioned, a lot of the lyrics, or some of the lyrics, have not aged particularly well, but urge you to listen to it. Take it for what it's worth, which was a bit of Disney history captured in the late 70s, early 80s, and hope you enjoy.
doctor, lawyer, and an Indian chief, fireman, inventor, and freedom of belief. Jazz bands, drugstores, and a candidate's speech. Liberated Mrs. and bikinis at the beach. This is America, it's big and it's grand. This is America, this is our land.
The second piece that Len mentioned was a song called I'm No Fool, which was meant to be for the Energy Pavilion. And, just to recap, as we mentioned, a little bit ahead of its time, very focused on environmental activism, environmental advocacy, which put it probably a little bit at odds with Exxon, who was sponsoring it. So again, never saw the light of day, but here it is for your listening pleasure.
I'm no fool, no siree, not when it comes to energy. You'd best take a look with me, 'cause you're no fool. Now anyone can be a fool, let things go to pot. But foolish people have to learn that being smart it's not. So come along, just you and me, let's find out about energy, which is what and what's to be, 'cause we're no fool. I'm no fool, no siree, take my word about energy. Nothing simple, ABC, hey, we're no fool. Now anyone can figure out we're headed for a fall. Unless we get together quick, we're gonna drop the ball. But we're no fools, no siree. There's one place we all agree, and we can duck catastrophe, 'cause we're no fool.
The next piece that Len found and mentioned was Enchanted Snow Palace, which was Disney's take on what was eventually going to become Frozen. So here is one of the pieces that Len was able to find. And lastly, wanted to share music from what was to be the Africa Pavilion at Epcot. Len mentioned it was some of his favorite music, and the stories he told were just terrific in terms of musicians that he found, the thought and care that went into what would have been. Sounds like an amazing pavilion, largely percussion based, a lot of great musicianship. So please enjoy this last bit of music. So that is it for this week's episode of the Music Behind the Magic podcast. Again, want to thank Len Testa for sharing his discoveries with us and being a part of this podcast. Please follow Len on touringplans.com on social as well. Also want to thank you all for listening and being part of this community. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, share with friends who you think might want to be a part of this community as well. Really appreciate all the support. Please let me know if you have any questions, any things you would like to hear about as well. You can follow me on social and also part of our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/musicbehindthemagic. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great week and have a very magical musical day. Looking forward to speaking with you all again real soon.